With so much salary cap space this offseason, we all want the Chicago Bears to aim high and aim big in free agency. But what if many of the top players you want don't end up even hitting the free agent market?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for more Bears talk, and make sure you hit the subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we look at, I don't want to say worst case scenarios, but we look at the very real possibility that some of the top free agent targets the Bears might be looking at won't hit free agency after all. Whether they get franchise tagged with this window currently open, whether they reach an agreement to re-sign with their current team, or for whatever reason get signed and traded. I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities here, and oftentimes good teams don't like to let their good young players go and hit the open market in free agency. So we'll look at some of the possible scenarios for guys like Daron Payne, Javon Hargrave, Saquon Barkley, Orlando Brown, etc. Look at what could happen to keep them with their team and what the Chicago Bears alternatives might be, so we can set our expectations appropriately if they don't become available. This was largely sparked by the news that Daron Payne is expected to receive the franchise tag from the Washington Commanders. If you've been listening to this podcast, we found out that down at the Senior Bowl and have been talking about that as a very strong possibility since early February here, so a little bit ahead of time. Not that it was some, massive scoop or that I'm pretending to be reporting some kind of amazing news there, but been trying to warn you that people around the Commanders have expected this to be what's going to happen here for quite some time now. He's seemingly the top defensive tackle prospect in terms of age, free agent prospect, in terms of age and skill set on the market that I think Bears fans are most excited about at that defensive line position. And it sure seems like they're not going to let him go, given how they're trying to approach their defensive line plans and salary cap space with Carson Wentz likely on the way out, et cetera, et cetera. They've got room to be able to make that work with Payne. That leaves Javon Hargrave then probably as the top defensive tackle prospect. And there's some reason to believe, that he's a guy who's more likely to hit free agency. And at this point, I'm more so expecting that to happen. But you never know. The Philadelphia Eagles can look at that defense and say, man, we've got an aging Lorin Cox who's going to be a free agent. They've got an aging Brandon Graham, who I believe is also going to be a free agent or has void years on his contract. Yeah, that are voiding it. No, I think he's got one more year this year on his contract, but still some aging members of that defensive line. And they had a couple of guys on just 1-year deals like Ndamukong Suh and some other mercenary types. And Hargrave has been a key piece of that interior that maybe they look at it and say, yeah, we want to bring him back for another few years and really make him another strong interior pass rusher to keep this Super Bowl window open here with Jalen Hurts before Jalen Hurts' next contract really kicks in and starts eating up a large part of their salary cap. I still think it's more likely that Hargrave becomes available, but if he and Payne are not, all of a sudden, you're missing that, I don't want to say sexy, but exciting interior defensive line free agent pickup. Like, I'd probably go next man up on the list, Dalvin Tomlinson from the Vikings. Really good player, but not the kind that gets you excited the way you have the pass rushing upside of Hargrave and Daron Payne as those big guys in the interior. Dalvin Tomlinson is a playmaker in the running game, for sure, but not a guy who's going to really pressure the quarterback a ton and make a big impact felt that way. It's just a little bit less exciting in that regard. If you want to go guys who've had a little more pass rush success, it's names that are not household and are, I think, young and up-and-coming players, but not like as proven and as high-end as the likes of Payne and Hargrave in that regard. I think the two that get thrown out there a lot are Dre'Mont Jones from the Denver Broncos and Zach Allen from the Arizona Cardinals. Both guys have had some pretty high sack production, but have also had some pretty good pass rushers around them for a lot of their careers. And there's some question about how they would do in more of a prominent premium role, more the number one type interior rusher in Chicago compared to being, a little bit farther down the priority list for opposing offenses to have to block on their previous defensive line situations. And again, you're not really like juiced up like, we got Dre'Mont Jones. Like this is the signing, right? Was that going to get you the same kind of energy? Probably not, but still can be a quality player that could fit into that rotation. I'll throw in David Onyemata from the New Orleans Saints. He was suspended for part of this season. I can't remember exactly why, or was it last season he had a suspension? Regardless, he's been kind of up and down at times and had some in and out injury situation, and had another bounce back year this year, 5 sacks, and played pretty darn well and gave them some of that pass rushing upside that we had seen him do a couple of years ago as well before he had missed some time in 2021. So it's like, these are guys that are in the 5 to 10 sack range. They're not the 10 plus sack range that Hargrave and Daron Payne are. So it's about kind of setting our expectations of like, okay, maybe the Bears might not be able to get the big fish in there. We can't count out Larry Ogunjobi either, who Ryan Poles tried to sign last offseason to a big contract, voided it because of the foot injury, signed a 1-year deal in Pittsburgh and played pretty well and is a free agent again this year. So Ryan Poles could go for that again, just going to be at clearly a significantly reduced price compared to the previous year when they were pursuing him. I know it's interior defensive lineman, so it's not a position that has like a ton of excitement and a ton of, getting you fired up as like winning free agency or getting the guy that you really want. It's just perhaps the position with the most strength at the top right now at positions of major need for the Chicago Bears compared to, wide receiver or edge rusher, where it's also a big need, but doesn't have the same level of star power at the top of free agency. It's a little easier to get excited about some of the other options at the skill positions and the names that are a little bit more like fantasy football household type names. So like a guy like Saquon Barkley, who might become a free agent, might be of interest to the Bears, but might stick around in New York after all, depending on what happens with their quarterback situation. We'll look at some alternatives at running back if Barkley can't be the guy, isn't available. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is powered by Built Bars, the world's best tasting protein bars. I eat a Built Bar literally every single day, and I would love to eat 3 Built Bars a day, but I would just run out of them too fast, and I can't afford to have all my meals be Built Bars because they really are the world's best tasting protein bar. They taste like candy bars. It's a sweet treat for me in the middle of the afternoon when I start feeling hungry, and even you get a little bit of that sugar craving, but they're low sugar. They're low calories. They're high fiber and they're high protein. They've got all the nutrients of a protein bar with all the taste of a candy bar. They're soft, easy to chew, covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in a bunch of delicious flavors. You can see them all at Built.com, or you can go to your nearest Sam's Club or Walmart and get them as early as today. If you go over to the pharmacy section in Walmart, you can find 4-bar boxes of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or their coconut puffs, which to me taste like chocolate-covered marshmallows. Those are wonderful. Or if you're close to a Sam's Club, you can run in and grab a 13-bar box of their hit flavors, brownie batter, which I have right now, and churro, which I just ran out of and love both of those flavors. Really, if you're near a Sam's Club, you got to go check those out. Trust me, you taste it, you'll believe it, and you'll thank me later. It's easy to get excited about Saquon Barkley as kind of the luxury splash weapon signing to pair with Justin Fields, even though conventional wisdom says don't pay a running back big money. And you look at this Bears roster, and running back is not, I don't even know if I would call it a need, even with David Montgomery as a free agent. It's very low on the priority list. It's not really a hole that needs to be filled on this offense. But you see the skill set of someone like Saquon Barkley, and you're like, wow. Imagine if Justin Fields is running read option and the defense has to decide, do we make Justin Fields keep it and try and tackle him, or do we make him hand it off to Saquon Barkley and try and tackle him? That's why I think you see Bears fans get fired up about him as a potential option. But people around the New York Giants still think they're going to be able to find a way to keep both Barkley and Daniel Jones at quarterback. It's just a matter of the exact timing of that. You know, the question is not so much like, I'm not sure whether or not Barkley will hit free agency or not, but I think the Giants, even if Barkley does hit free agency, he may still end up going back to the Giants, seeing what's out there, seeing how other offers compare to the Giants, and ultimately choosing to stay in New York, where he seems to genuinely want to belong. If they can work out a deal with Daniel Jones ahead of time, before the franchise tag deadline is over or before free agency, they could easily franchise tag Saquon Barkley and may still do that and maybe take their chances with losing Daniel Jones instead. We'll see exactly how New York wants to handle that situation, but the folks I was talking to down in Mobile, involved and around the Giants organization, feel like Barkley is someone who is more likely than not going to stay with the team. So then the question becomes, like, do you need to sign another running back there? I mean, or how big of a running back do you need to sign? If Barkley doesn't become available, do you just go back to David Montgomery? I think it depends on what the price is there. If I'm the Bears, I'm kind of setting a number, and I say, David, go into free agency. This is how much we're willing to pay you. If you can go get more money than this from another team, we wish you the best of luck. But we'd love to have you back at this number. This is our number. Of course, knowing in your head, you might be able to budge a little bit, if it's a little bit here or there. But like generally kind of set a number and say, go looking for better offers than this. If you can find it, take it. Best of luck to you, and we'll move on. And if not, then bring him back if that's a number that becomes workable for both sides. There's also someone a little bit more exciting like Josh Jacobs, but I don't know. Barkley is a certain type of like explosive weapon that really like sets fear into the eyes of opponents. And not that, Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing this season. That's not to take something away from him, but like, I don't know, there's something about Barkley after the catch. There's something about Barkley's explosiveness. There's just something about him that gives me more of that like energy and excitement about him than a guy like Josh Jacobs, who's really, really good. But if we're talking about adding him to the Chicago Bears, right? I want that guy who's going to be that pass catching weapon as well and add that dynamic ability in both areas. And Jacobs, don't get me wrong, makes plays after the catch. He's had like 53 catches for 400 yards this season, but it's just not quite the Barkley level explosiveness. Like he's a little bit more volume in that regard compared to Barkley, who's got a little bit more efficiency. Like they fed Josh Jacobs so much in Vegas to be able to be as productive as he does. And certainly Barkley has been fed quite a bit over the course of his career. And this podcast is not to be, let's argue Barkley versus Josh Jacobs. It's just more like, hey, that's an alternative here who might not even hit free agency in and of itself. Depending on what the Raiders do they get Aaron? I think they're waiting for Aaron Rodgers to figure out his stuff first, and then from there they can start to make some of these other decisions. But it's very likely that Josh Jacobs could be back with the Raiders and not even be a consideration for the Bears here, but a name to keep in mind as an alternative there. To me, we talked about this a little bit on a podcast talking about Khalil Herbert and how I think you could make him your first and second down running back and just add a third down back to try and pair with him and not worry about having like that new number one. Like make Herbert sort of your lead back and have a different back come in for pass catching situations. I look at Jerick McKinnon from the Kansas City Chiefs, the Super Bowl champion Jerick McKinnon, who I think didn't lead all running backs in receiving yards this year, but certainly among free agent running backs is the leader in receiving yards this year among guys that are going to be available on the market this year. Again, still possible he could re-sign with the Chiefs, but they've got some salary cap issues to work through. McCaffrey led running backs in receiving yards, and Eckler was way up there too. So not leading the league, but among the free agent targets, McKinnon was the most productive receiver of any of the running backs available this year, and a guy that would not be a guy you go to run the ball a ton on first and second down. You're not giving McKinnon 15 carries a game, but maybe you're giving him 5 to 10 and throwing it to him 5 to 10 times in that game, being that check down backfield option that gives you a little bit more juice after the catch than what the Bears have had. We'll also throw in Samaje Perine from the Cincinnati Bengals. It's always been kind of that complement to Joe Mixon. I think that would work really well with the Bears and have him be the complement to Khalil Herbert in this Bears offense. But those are not the names that get you fired up for the season. You're not going to go out and buy your Jerick McKinnon jersey or your Samaje Perine jersey the way you're going to go out and buy your Saquon Barkley jersey if he were to come to the Chicago Bears. And I think it's just important to keep in mind that it's more likely than not that either A, the Bears won't have a chance to sign him, or B, the Bears won't be the one to sign him. And we could end up seeing the team opt for more of these second and third level free agents at some of these positions that have players where we might be getting our hopes up for. That you come away with a Dre'Mont Jones and a Samaje Perine instead of a Daron Payne and a Saquon Barkley, because you can't afford to spend on every big free agent, and some of these big free agents just won't hit the open market. We could see something similar at offensive tackle, where there's a couple of big name guys at the top that are going to get paid big time money, and you could see the connection to the Chicago Bears, but you can also see their respective teams saying, no, we can't afford to lose these bookend tackles for our young quarterbacks. We got to make sure we keep them in our book. So other options at offensive tackle, it gets a little bit ugly once you get past the top guys of the list. We'll take a look at where things could go after Orlando Brown and Mike McGlinchey next on Locked On Bears. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Pro Football GM. It's a free mobile game app that's so much fun because it puts you in complete control of your own football franchise. You get to make these free agency decisions. Do I sign the big expensive player at my position of need, or do I go to the more cost-effective players further down? How do I prioritize where I want to spend my free agent dollars on my franchise? But it's not just free agency. It's the entire offseason and the entire regular season, playoffs, postseason, you name it, NFL draft, trades, hiring and firing coaches, setting ticket prices and advertising, and injuries and depth charts and all the above, all for your own football franchise for free on your mobile phone in a challenging and realistic game world. Locked On Bears listeners can get a 100% free boost to your franchise in Ultimate Football GM when you use our promo code LOCKEDON in the game store. That's all caps, Locked On. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on your app store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. I'm really curious to see how the Chicago Bears approach the offensive line this offseason because of all the young players they have. I think they have some real flexibility there in what they do with Cody Whitehair and whether they leave Tevin Jenkins at right guard or try and push him back to right tackle and how they view about the center position. But it does seem like, first of all, the obvious immediate hole is right tackle, but B, like offensive tackle in general, seems to be where we see more of the emphasis this offseason. I think maybe presumably Cody Whitehair comes back at left guard, Tevin Jenkins stays at right guard, and Lucas Patrick is your starting center. And so then it's probably Braxton Jones at one tackle spot, and then probably a new outside player at the other tackle spot. Which one is left, which one is right, to be determined. But Orlando Brown is kind of the clear consensus top left tackle, and Mike McGlinchey from the 49ers, I think, is pretty well the top right tackle. And you can see why both of those teams would really want to keep their really solid offensive tackles. I mean, the Chiefs traded for Orlando Brown from the Baltimore Ravens, made him a big part of that investment that Ryan Poles was involved in rebuilding that offensive line and giving Patrick Mahomes a strong enough supporting cast to win the Super Bowl. And you don't generally want to have to get rid of guys that were key figures in your Super Bowl run. Maybe Orlando Brown is too expensive of an offensive tackle for the Chiefs to be able to keep up with. They are a team that, as it sits right now, is a little bit over the salary cap, so needs to clear room before they can re-sign anybody, let alone pay an offensive tackle top dollar. But it's also a team that's very flexible in terms of salary cap and is always doing a good job of finding more ways to get more money. And if you're going to go out of your way to trade for Brown after he had some tumultuous times in Baltimore and stick through this process, I don't see them being eager to get rid of him if they can do anything they can to hold on to him. Similar kind of thing, well, a different backstory, but I think similar motivations for the San Francisco 49ers when it comes to Mike McGlinchey. They drafted him in the first round in 2018. They've seen him grow and develop across these 5 years, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 5 years in San Francisco. And you've got two young quarterbacks, Brock Purdy and Trey Lance. What's better for a young quarterback than a good offensive line? That's why the Bears would be looking for one for Justin Fields. And with San Francisco, you've got Trent Williams on the other side, who's on maybe his last year or second to last year. He's 34, so maybe you can get a couple more years out of Trent Williams. But why give up on the 28-year-old Mike McGlinchey, a little older than I thought, but still a right tackle in his prime when you have such an old left tackle who may need to be replaced within the next couple of seasons anyway? Why create that hole for yourself? Just seems like it would be really good for so many of their own young players. They do have a little bit of salary cap space as is, some room to complete some more there. And a team that's, losing some pieces across the board here and needs to kind of settle things up there. But when you get out of the Jeremy Garoppolo contract, that, there's some room that's saved that way. And they're not missing like a ton of pricey other starters that they absolutely need to replace. So it would make sense that they try and do what they can to keep Mike McGlinchey. Although McGlinchey has kind of hinted that he's looking to get as much money as possible and will go to the highest bidder. So maybe he won't accept a 49ers offer until he sees what a team like the Bears could offer. And maybe that makes this, an easier opportunity for the Bears. But if he gets a little bit pricey, is that as much as the Bears want to spend on right tackle when they need to spend on defensive tackle, defensive end, linebacker, maybe wide receiver, depending on what becomes available at that position? How much are they willing to spend at right tackle in this mix? Or if they cut Cody Whitehair, then you need a guard as well. And it becomes a question of whether they're in on a guy like McGlinchey or Brown if either one hits the open market. The problem is, it gets rough from there. Juwan Taylor from Jacksonville is a popular name. And I don't know, he pass blocks pretty well, but he's a guy who there's some real rough snaps of him in the running game. And I think the Bears value the running game so much that I don't know that he's quite the fit they would be looking for in that regard. I feel like they would more value a better run blocker than pass blocker. And he always gets way too over his heels, weight is too far forward and can kind of get off balance too easily despite being a pretty big, strong guy. So I don't know if Juwan Taylor is quite the right fit, although he has gotten better over the years. Or Caleb McGarry from the Atlanta Falcons was kind of on his way out for a while in Atlanta and had a really good final year of his contract and now is hitting the free agent market at a good time. But do you trust the one good year or the handful of mediocre to below average years at times with Atlanta? We'll see about that. And similar story for Isaiah Wynn from the New England Patriots, who has been really, really good at times and really not great at times. And that's what you appreciate about Mike McGlinchey. It's that he's been pretty steady, solid, consistent guy throughout his time in San Francisco. And that's a lot of times what you're paying for on the offensive line. It's not about being, getting the guy who's like a little bit faster or a little bit bigger, but just the guy who's the most consistent of the group. And I don't know that McGarry and Wynn scream consistency to me, and Taylor certainly doesn't in the running game. So it becomes ugly, I think. You're not thrilled about, you don't feel like those guys are necessarily solving your complete and total offensive line hole if you end up signing one of them instead of Orlando Brown or McGlinchey. Maybe at that point, do you say, okay, we'll move Tevin Jenkins to right tackle and then sign one of the good guards? There's some better guard depth in this free agent market. Isaac Seumalo from the Philadelphia Eagles and Ben Powers from the Ravens are both two of the better guys at that position. And I feel like your offensive line is better with Jenkins at right tackle and a guy like Seumalo or Powers at right guard, a free agent guard, and Jenkins at right tackle, as opposed to Jenkins at guard and Isaiah Wynn or Caleb McGarry at right tackle. That is assuming that you get the same Tevin Jenkins at tackle that you've been getting at guard. And I would rather keep Jenkins at guard and get a better tackle to pair with him. But we'll see what the free agent market has in store that way, because it could get iffy if Brown and McGlinchey are not available or just price themselves out of what the Bears are willing to spend on the offensive line. Because that's a topic I want to talk about soon on the podcast. A couple of other offensive line topics are going to be coming maybe next week, but certainly in the lead up to free agency. I'm kind of still figuring out our content calendar here. But two things I want to talk about in future Locked On Bears podcasts that you'll need to come back for is, one, maybe why spending big, certainly on Orlando Brown, is too much to spend for the Bears offensive line. That the offensive line is not the place to overspend, but it's not the place to underspend, but mainly because the offensive line is not about getting the offensive line is more about who's your worst player as opposed to who's your best player. And having the best left tackle in the NFL is not as big of an advantage as having the best wide receiver or the best running back or the best quarterback. So I want to get in some offensive line value stuff on a future podcast. And I also want to have the discussion about what's more important for Justin Fields, offensive line or wide receiver. Which should be a higher priority for the Bears building up to be stronger this offseason, understanding that both are important, but which is more important for Fields specifically. Those will be two upcoming future episodes of this Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We are the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day, and that includes all of your sports teams. So go check out our other Locked On Chicago sports, Bulls, Cubs, White Sox, Blackhawks, Illini, Northwestern, etc., or any of your other favorite sports teams. We've got a podcast for you. Go check them out for your second listen today. Come on back on Monday and make Locked On Bears your first listen once again. And you have to come on back for your next opportunity to bear down.